Alex Sarr and Bronny James may be making most of the Summer League rookie headlines, but there are plenty of guys working to prove that this draft class is not nearly as bad as people made it out to be.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Wednesday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton. Today, you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content Monday through Friday, every week of the year, not just around in the season. We are here all off season long. I want to give a special shout out to our everyday listeners. Thank you for being somebody who makes this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you all that today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. Playoffs are winding down. The sports are not sporting like we want them to, but this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everybody every day all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. All right, folks, joined today by Leaf Tulane, our regular contributor on Wednesdays, as well as a host of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Spent some time this summer hosting Locked On Jazz as well. Leafs all over the Summer League action. So we're going to talk rookie stars at Summer League. We're going to talk guards, wings. In the first segment, we're going to talk about some of the bigs. In the second segment, how Zach Edey's looking with Memphis, Clingan, Kel'el Ware, etc. in the second segment. And then we're going to close out the show looking at some undrafted guys who look like they're going to be potentially guys who can stick in the NBA, and then talk about some guys who maybe aren't doing as well as we'd like to see them do. We'll end the show talking a little bit about Bronny James as well. So, Leaf, let's start in the backcourt. Looking at some guys, and I'll let you kind of take this whatever direction you want, because really, I feel like when we're talking about especially the early picks in this draft, out of the college ranks at least, we're seeing a lot of guys really look like the best versions of the players that we thought they could be in the NBA, and some guards in particular who are really standing out.
Yeah, I have 4 guards in the lottery that I think have been excellent from the college basketball ranks. And honestly, you can make a case for 5, but one has just not played as much as the others. Mm-hmm. So my first one will be Stephon Castle.
Yeah,
I ended up with him as my number 1 prospect on my big board. And if I were to do a redraft already, which is ludicrous to think, I'd probably still pick him 1.
Yeah,
he's got this sophistication of he knows where to be on the basketball court. He's found a way to be incredibly impactful without the ball, with an All-American point guard taking the position that he wants to play, a shooter in Cam Spencer who's also thriving in the Summer League, a center in Donovan Clingan, and then a all Big East caliber player in Alex Caravan. And he found a way to be impactful nonetheless on the UConn team in various ways. Now you give him the reins and you're like, okay, maybe there's going to be some growing pains, and maybe there will be at the higher level, but he's shown he knows how to impact the game. And then at the point guard spot, he uses pick and roll, gets into the paint, uses his body and strong at the rim, shoots with confidence. That was the big question, is how many of these guards and wings were deficient shooters? Most of them. Like you look at Holland, you look at Buzelis, you look at Cody Williams, even though he shot 42%, he only shot 1.4 per game. That doesn't bode that well. I could go on and on. Castle perhaps had the most concerning numbers because his were wide open and he was struggling. Well, he steps in off the dribble and rhythm shots, makes other players better, and you know what he can do defensively. Like if you remember the national championship, I went on a podcast, and I think it was Big Board, and I said UConn's going to win by 20 because Braden Smith's not going to be able to dribble. He's not going to be able to breathe, and that's what happened. I mean, he hounded Mark Sears as well. So the reason I bring him up first is he's got the largest role to play on a team that is going to grow together. Victor Wembanyama and Castle are going to be great. He's also going to be with Chris Paul, who's known to kind of poke and prod and get the players that are young and they're not his contemporaries, but they're kind of his projects to make better. And I think he's going to be the guy from this class that comes out the best, at least in the early return. So I'm excited for him. I think so far he would be my number 1 graded player from the Summer League of the rookie class.
Castle has looked great. I absolutely agree with you. I think the concerns about the shot, the nitpicking, certainly I think it was understandable to be apprehensive about him playing point guard just because he didn't do that in college. But if you look at his high school tape, you look at the skill set, I think I think there was a little bit of overthinking on Stephon Castle in some degree of like, this guy's going to be, he's just a really good basketball player and he's going to be good, and you put him in a different role and he's going to succeed. And that's what we're seeing so far. And like you said, yeah, there's probably going to be growing pains. Turns out most 19-year-old guards have growing pains in the NBA. That's not to be unexpected, but he gets to grow with the team, with a young core around him in Wembanyama and some of the other younger guys on that team. They're coached by a legendary coach. Chris Paul is going to be in the mix. Like, Castle is really set up to succeed in a major way in San Antonio. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if he ends up being the best or one of the very best players out of this draft class. I think the best player out of this draft class is incredibly attainable for him the way he looks so far in Summer League.
Yeah, I think the strangest part is the type of players that succeed in summer league often are the ones who rely on physical talent, like athleticism. They get to the rim, or they shoot like better than advertised. I feel like the way he's scored has been really sustainable.
Yeah,
and who knows? But they look like NBA sets. He comes off a pick and roll. He gets into the mid range. He puts up a floater. He puts up a mid range shot. He gets all the way to the rim and scores. He comes off a screen and shoots a three. All those things are sustainable. And I think whereas a lot of other players are kind of getting license and leeway to do a lot of things off the dribble that I don't think they necessarily would get. And the other one, and I'd be remiss not to say that it would be a tough pick between who's played the best so far without saying Reed Sheppard.
Right.
And so Reed Sheppard, I ended up lower on in the process because I was hesitant about his ability to play point guard with his size deficiency, saying he probably wouldn't be a two guard. So he was really, really dependent on being a point guard in order of being successful in the NBA. And I said this on NBA Big Board last night is I kind of think I overthought the effect of he has on a basketball game. Like when he was in for Kentucky, he often played with Dillingham, and the game was so much prettier. And I think he simplifies basketball. He really gets it. He's going to be impactful. I still have my hesitation about him being an effective NBA point guard because he plays on a team, especially in the Rockets, where they have a lot of players that need the ball in their hands. So I feel like he's a spacer, but that makes him have to be so much more defensive as opposed to the stuff we've seen with the dribbling, the ability to play with pace, which has impressed me the most. Like he's not lickety split quick, but he knows how to change pace. He knows how to come off screens and shoot the ball. He didn't do that at Kentucky. He only came off 4 screens the entire season for threes. 4. There was a couple more he came off of and dribbled into the paint and stuff, but that's a really low number. It's alarming. And I think that was more of a conjecture. Everyone assumed he'd be able to play point guard at a high level, and so far he's been great. No denying that. I still have apprehension about do I think that he's going to coincide well with Amen Thompson, who I also think should be a point guard. And obviously you'd say, well, one's great on defense, the other one's small. Maybe that's great. Could be, but one can't shoot, so you're going to put the ball in the other one's hand? I don't know. So that's not necessarily him related, but I do have qualms or just questions about the fit, and that's why I'm a little more positive on Castle, just because I see the direct correlation to how he'll play.
Yeah, I'm with you on that 100%. With Houston's roster construction, I think Sheppard fits in some ways, but I am curious who's going to have the ball. Sheppard has looked great because he's got the ball in his hands and he's just getting the opportunity to do kind of whatever he wants with the basketball. It's a bit more free flowing in Summer League. What's that going to look like when you get into a more distinct set in Houston with different talent around you? I have no questions about Sheppard's ability to impact the game. Like you said, he's looked fantastic in that regard, but it will be interesting to see how that fit works in Houston. Leaf, want to talk about a few other guys here. There's just a handful of players we've seen really succeed in that kind of guard room. You mentioned 2 guys who are in the top 5 of the draft. Want to move a little bit further down in the draft. Bub Carrington he had a triple-double in his first game, has looked absolutely incredible. Was a guy that really was kind of a darling on a lot of mock drafts, a lot of draft boards. Draft Twitter loved Bub Carrington, and he was one of the youngest players in the entire draft class. And it sure looks like he's going to potentially be a real dude for Washington. I had him as high as I think top 10 on my mock drafts. He ended up going 14, snuck inside the lottery. Really like the early returns we've seen from Bub so far in Summer League.
Well, I'm really glad we got to get one more guard in because that was the guy I was going to go with.
Perfect.
Bub Carrington, to me, has been the player that I think has the clearest path to be the Rookie of the Year.
Whoa, all right.
And why I say that is Washington doesn't have anyone that you think, well, the ball needs to be in their hands. Like even Denny Avdia has been moved now. Alex Sarr needs a guard, and he's still struggling because he's trying to create of his own. The only roadblock there is if Tyus Jones is back, and that could happen, and then I would retract my statement. But Bub Carrington, I ended up with him in my I think he was number 12 for me. Bub Carrington gets to the rim. But he's not a great finisher. But he's silky smooth in the mid range. He gets to the mid range and elevates and scores. He reads the pick and rolls beautifully, uses his height to see over the defense. He shoots off the dribble threes, which is the most dynamic thing in NBA basketball. Like you don't see that often in college basketball because it's not necessarily a great shot. But in the NBA, if you can create an off the dribble three and you make them, that's super hard to guard and stretch the defense incredibly because they have to jump up and guard you as well as the roll man. And typically a roll man can dunk it pretty easily. So I really like him. I think he's going to be a first team all rookie, if not a rookie of the year. I watched him a little bit at the beginning of the season at Pittsburgh, kind of fell under the radar for a little bit, kept checking his stats. Then you'll go watch the ACC tournament build up. And I think 3 of his last 5 games, he scored 24 points or more. And it was against Carolina, BC, and maybe NC State, something like that. And it was like teams that were really trying hard, trying to solidify seeding, make the tournament. And he scored 24 and like had like 10 boards in 2 of them. Like you just don't see that type of production from an 18-year-old that's not going to be good. So I'm really bullish on Bub Carrington. And I'm thrilled that you brought him up because I don't think enough people, even in college basketball, like people like you and I talked about it enough because it was just kind of a weird team. Pittsburgh made a push to make the tournament. They didn't make it, but like if they didn't have Bub Carrington, they were terrible.
Well, yeah, with all due respect to Hunter Salas, who I think is a fantastic player and a very potential All-American, like there was 2 teams in the ACC that had fantastic guard play that were on the cusp of making the NCAA tournament, and Salas and Wake Forest got what feels like a fair amount more attention than Carrington and Pitt, and Carrington was just a phenomenal player who sort of flew under the radar in a lot of ways. Leaf, we're going to move on. We're going to talk bigs. We can maybe talk about a few more of these wings. There's quite a few guys on the list that we didn't quite get to in the second segment. But I also want to make sure we talk about Zach Edey because he had a very, very excellent first game in the Summer League back in Salt Lake. Haven't seen a ton of him since then, but we really got a glimpse of what a role might look like for him in Memphis next year. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts to kind of hear how this all might shake out for him. And we're going to get to that in just a second. Right after I tell you all about today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, I love sports. Leaf loves sports. We all love sports, and we never, ever want them to stop. But here we are, middle of summer, all-star break for baseball. Olympics are coming up, but it's kind of a slow time. The sports are not sportsing the way that we typically want them to. However, FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And if you're looking at those Olympics and want to have a vested interest, Team USA is at minus 480 right now to take home the gold medal, followed by Canada at plus 1100 and Victor Wembanyama and the French national team right after that at plus 1300. So folks, head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, segment 2, still Edey Patton, still Leaf Tulane of Locked On NBA Big Board, still here hanging out with us on Locked On College Basketball, talking about some NBA Summer League standouts. And we're going to get to Zach Edey. We're going to talk about the bigs. There was one other name I wanted to mention in segment 1, so I'm just going to toss it out here real quick. Terrence Shannon has looked outstanding for the Minnesota Timberwolves, a guy that I also think, obviously there was a lot of off-the-court stuff that went on with him. It was a very unfortunate situation. We don't need to dig all the way into that, but it marred, I think, what could have been more of a conversation about how impactful he could potentially be in the NBA. And he slips to the late first round, goes 27th to Minnesota, and has looked like I think I'm curious if Shannon's somebody who's going to dominate in Summer League because of the style of Summer League basketball and maybe not be as impactful at the NBA level. Obviously, he's on a very crowded Minnesota roster, so he's not going to get that kind of run. But I've been very impressed with what he has done so far for Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, he could be good for Minnesota, but I think the Summer League, if you'd ask me which players it helps the most, it's the guys who want the ball in their hands and want to get to the rim in transition.
Yeah.
Like another player that's similar to Shannon, not quite as good of a player, is Ricky Council.
Yeah.
Ricky Council scored 30 in the first game of Salt Lake Summer League.
Yeah,
he doesn't
awesome.
sniff the NBA roster very often, but the dude could not be stopped because he just goes to the rim, steals the ball against these comparatively inept ball handlers, and then goes up and dunks it. And then if he hits a few threes, oh, watch out.
Yeah.
But so Shannon's a little bit better. I think he and Dillingham have had good summer leagues for the T-Wolves. And I'm curious to see how Shannon plays because they've got the right kind of combination of vets. Conley obviously is the calm, the helpful one. I think Ant Edwards is actually, even though they're the same age, is actually very helpful to Shannon because he's that type of freak athlete that can simplify his game and tell Shannon, be like, you know what, like all you got to do is defend and run, and you're gonna do well. So I actually liked that landing spot a lot, even though I've been at times hesitant about Shannon because I think a lot of it's he's just a better athlete than everyone.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to become bullish on Shannon because he's done the right things. He's improved the right parts of his game, and he's got a tremendous work ethic.
All right, let's switch over and talk about some of the bigs, and we'll start with Zach Edey. He had that game against Utah in Salt Lake Summer League a while back. He had that game tying tip in. He had 14 and 15. Did it against Walker Kessler, who's fourth in the NBA in blocks over the last 2 years. And Edey goes out there, gets 4 blocks, gets 14 points. Looks excellent in that game. And we haven't seen a ton of him since then. But what I really liked about that performance, and what I'm curious to hear from you, is he didn't just go post up on the block and demand the basketball and score like over his right shoulder like he did so much at Purdue. He didn't need to do that to be effective. And I think that was the concern. Obviously, the defense is still a concern in the drop coverage and everything. But one of the big concerns for Edey is, well, NBA teams aren't just going to, post feed him the basketball every possession. And he was out there setting screens. He was handling the ball away from the rim. He was making passes. Like, he looked like somebody who can contribute offensively for this Memphis team, especially when he's, on the big club and they have Ja Morant and Desmond Bane and everybody else around him. Like, he didn't look like somebody who's just going to clog up the paint, which was kind of the fear that a lot of people had and the concern when he got drafted so high. But I was very impressed by his performance. Obviously, there are still limitations to him just in terms of how you can utilize him on the defensive end of the floor, but he definitely looks like somebody who's got more offensive versatility than I think a lot of people gave him credit for.
He was so thin, like in a good way. Like, he's still a behemoth of a man, but like you look at him and hit the movement. Like, my main concern about Edey was not effectiveness in the half court. It was not even effectiveness as a rim protector. It was just how often can he run the floor? Because Purdue, everyone says, oh, he played 39 minutes in like 3 of those last games, and they were physical and they were long. And I was like, absolutely. But when Purdue's on offense, he lumbers behind and he waits to set the screen. Ja Morant doesn't work like that. And he was running the floor really well. Kessler's one of the better rim runners in the NBA. I was at that game, and Edey, I think the stats were a little kind to him in terms of the impact. Like, I think he had some rebounds and he had a few loud plays. But the fact that he was playing as a third-year center, like you said, who rebounds the ball, who defends the rim as well as Kessler does, made me optimistic about Edey. And what I was impressed with, it didn't have that much to do with basketball. It's just how in shape he was. Like, he, in altitude, was running like a deer up and down the court with one of the best rim runners in the NBA. And he was protecting the rim. He was rebounding the ball, showed his physicality on that final play where he slapped it off the glass back in. I really am impressed. I had Edey low, and I think he's a guy I'm too low on. I was too low on, I should say, because I expected just the lack of ability to run at a pace consistently to bite him in the butt. And I think he's just taken so much time and in intensity on focusing on fitness. He's going to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because the player who I think has looked a little bit more lumbering has been Donovan Clingan so far. The other, big man taken in the top 10 of this draft for the Portland Trail Blazers. I've watched pretty much every minute of Portland Trail Blazers Summer League basketball. Some of you know on the show. That's my team. That's my fandom. So I have enjoyed getting to watch him. And he doesn't look as in shape. Certainly, like you mentioned, Edey's been looking great. Donovan has looked fine, but I think he's still got some processing stuff he needs to work on. You expect that from a younger big, but man, when he can get to his spots, when he makes he's such a dynamic rim protector. I think he's gotten 5 blocks in his couple of games. He's a tremendous rebounder. He hit a 3-pointer in his last game, so we're starting to see that. The upside still feels really high with Donovan, but what I just, from my observations, and I'm kind of curious your thoughts, we still see somebody who's got some work to do on the physical side, I think, to be able to be a bit more impactful. But I like the fit in Portland, especially as long as they keep DeAndre Ayton, because I think it allows Clingan to not be forced into a role where he's playing 25, 28 minutes a game and just gassed coming up and down the floor. I think he's going to be in a smaller role, and I think that might help him kind of make that adjustment into the NBA ranks. But I like the upside, but you can still see some work to be done for Donovan.
Yeah, Clingan to me has a few issues that are correctable. The first one being he's never been a very good jumper.
Yeah.
Like, he had a 28.5-inch vertical. And I remember early in this season when he was coming back from a foot injury, he missed 11 games, and Samson Johnson played the center, and UConn went 11-0. And I was like, well, you can't be that great of a prospect if your team does that without you, especially against some solid competition. Turns out, like, they were just far better than the rest. And at that point, it hadn't been sorted who was the best team. It became clear in that stretch. But the reason I bring that up is when he came back, I remember watching him thinking, he catches the ball into the hoop, he's got to go up and dunk that. He's 7'2".
Yeah.
And he'd get kind of rim stuffed or fouled on layups. And I remember thinking to myself, that's a glaring deficiency. I can't have him within my top 8. Like, I mean, 8's still not a bad spot. I actually ended up with him 7 on the board, and he went 7th. But my logic basically hinges on he needs to use his strengths of processing and then just commit to being physical and athletic near the rim. Like you said, he's going to have someone to spell minutes with, so he can use some fouls. He can use some athletic, use some of that explosiveness on offense, because defensively he knows how to play the game without fouling. He goes straight up. He goes with verticality. He's like Roy Hibbert. And then the one thing I've been really impressed with is everyone falls in love with the 3. They're enamored with the potential of 3 ball. Jonas Valanciunas shot 50% from 3 couple of years ago, and no one guarded him, and it's still the win for the defense, even with that great of percentage, because if you're not guarding him and he misses, then you get all the rebounds, you have an extra defender near the paint. So I don't really care about the 3. What I care about is the fact he's kind of an offensive hub as a passer. He's I think he had 5 assists in one of those games.
Yeah, he did.
And he holds the ball up high, he processes, and at UConn, some of them are really simple reads because the team had such an elaborate offense. It would be Castle's wide open on a back cut, find him in the short corner. It would be Caravan's popped out on a flare. Newton's gone on a back cut. Cam Spencer's popped out on a back screen, and he's gotten into a 3. Their actions were great, but he made the right passes all the time. And I thought, well, that's just UConn. He had 5 assists in a summer league game where they don't really feed the ball to the center very often. And so I really like his passing. I think his defense is real. Offensively, I'm a little scared because he just doesn't have the lift of a roll man. Like you talk about Rudy Gobert, he's an offensive, he's like a what's it called, a vertical spacer. And I don't know if Clingan's got that, and that'll maybe bring him down once he hits his peak, just because he's not quite that athlete. But that's just extremely nitpicky.
Yeah. One more guy I want to talk about here real quick. We got quite a few other bigs that I think are having solid performances in Summer League, and we can talk about a few of them to close out the show too. But I follow our great friend Brendan Clean, who hosts the Locked On Suns podcast, fantastic show over there. And he was saying that he thinks that the best scoring center on the Phoenix Suns roster already might be Oso Ighodaro. And I think he was slightly taking a shot at Yusuf Nurkic, and that's fair. But I thought Oso was a guy who could have gone a little bit earlier. He went 40th overall to Phoenix. He's got that little floater, that little kind of short roll shot. He's a great connector, great kind of processor. You can utilize him in different ways. And I like the fit in a Phoenix roster where they don't want Oso to be somebody who takes a lot of touches, who does a lot of, low post scoring. That's certainly not the role that they're envisioning for him, but it feels like he can kind of fit in nicely with this Phoenix core. And for the Suns, they don't have a lot of they have very little draft capital. They kind of had to capitalize on the few picks they had here to put guys around their core to try to contend for a championship. And I thought they really hit a home run with getting Oso Ighodaro in the second round here.
Yeah, I love the spot for Oso. Oso is one of the most landing spot dependent players in this draft to me, because if you put him on a team that doesn't have the creators that Phoenix does, then you end up with a guy who's a solid athlete but unspectacular, a little undersized, and doesn't shoot it well. So there's someone's going to pigeonhole him at the 4. Like, he's a playmaking 5, and he's got great touch. He shoots that push shot beautifully. He is a good leaper, but he's not huge. So I can envision him in the short roll, setting screens for Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, catching the ball, creating, kicking out to the weak side to open shooters. That was a match made in heaven. And then I know we're running short before the break, but Kel'el Ware deserves a little bit of a shout here, because I don't think anyone's improved their stock more than Kel'el Ware since the summer league. He was picked 15th, which I know is not that far down the road, But talent-wise, even if you were to take him at Oregon or out of high school, he should have been a top 5 pick in this class.
Yeah.
But he just wasn't because there was a lack of motor. There was a lack of productivity at times. And right now he's putting up double-doubles with ease, running the floor, blocking shots, hitting open threes. I mean, I think Miami was a great landing spot because they light a fire under your butt. But he's found a way to impact the game in all facets, not just like, oh, I'm the best athlete on the floor, let me just block one shot here. He's doing it all. I think if they're an all NBA summer league team, which I think there will be at the end of this, he's got to be on it if they're making that right now, of only rookies, that is.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Ware, and I'm glad you mentioned Miami, because that's kind of the direction I want to go now, because I really like the players that Miami kind of collected out of this draft class in the draft, and then the undrafted guys as well. I think we want to talk about a few undrafted guys. Keshad Johnson, is absolutely on that list. He's looked fantastic, a guy that a lot of people thought should have been selected anyway. And we're going to talk more about those undrafted guys. We'll get to Bronny James a little bit as well, all coming up in just a second. All right, folks, Leaf to Lead. Andy Patton here, Locked On College Basketball, talking NBA Summer League stars. We talked some guards in the first segment, talked about some of the bigs, including Zach Edey in the second segment there. Now I want to talk about some guys who did not get drafted, who have so far looked very good in the Summer League. Every year, there are undrafted guys who ball out in the Summer League. Some of them end up sticking in the NBA and having productive careers. Some of them just end up being Summer League legends who never really actually stick at the next level. It's always a little bit hard to tell, like we talked about earlier, just because the style of Summer League is advantageous for certain players and maybe not as advantageous for others. I wrote a list of a few undrafted guys who I've been impressed with personally. I already mentioned Keshad Johnson, so Leaf, we can talk about him, or if there are some other guys that didn't get picked that you thought either should have been picked or have certainly looked the part of an NBA player up to this point in Summer League. Feel free to take your pick there on who you want to chat about.
I love Keshad Johnson. I saw Keshad Johnson play 3 times in person this year. Saw him at Utah, and then I saw him in Utah when he played at the tournament against Long Beach State and against Dayton.
Yeah.
And, it's strange. Everyone thought in Arizona, like, Caleb Love's the player of the year, so he's going to draw the headlines. Boswell's the key player. Ballo and Krivas are the matchup issues. And then you kind of forget about the 2 best NBA prospects. You're like, Pelle Larsson had a chance to really solidify himself. I think he tailed off at the end of the season. And then Keshad Johnson, every time I watched him, I kept thinking to myself, how is that guy not an NBA player? Because he defends at such an elite level. And I think I tweeted this. I could be wrong. Maybe it's a figment of my imagination. But I think I tweeted, whoever gets Keshad Johnson in the Summer League is probably going to get an NBA player.
Yeah.
And the Miami Heat are the perfect Keshad Johnson landing spot. Like, you talk about Haywood Highsmith, who came from a D2 school. Well, imagine the exact same build, makeup, and just defensive versatility with a guy who his main glaring deficiency is a shot that honestly looks pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, Keshad Johnson, it has the intangibles to win. And I've really liked him for a while. I thought he was really good at San Diego State, went to Arizona. And I know I tweeted this one, that Keshad Johnson going to Arizona last year, I thought made them a contender, like a true contender, because that's what they lacked in years past, is a switchable wing as opposed to just having 2 bigs. I still think they were poorly coached down the stretch in terms of how they go about it. And I don't think you could win with Caleb Love as like the guy, but Keshad Johnson, I'm all about. So I'm really happy you put him on your list. And that would have been the guy I led off with regardless.
The other one that I really want to talk about, there's quite a few guys who are looking good, but Dennis Jenkins had a really excellent game for Detroit not that long ago. I think he had 26 points. He had 6 threes. Just looked the part, and he's a little bit undersized. And again, he's kind of in that territory where you're undersized and you're not a point guard, so you're kind of it's hard to be a 6'3", 6'4", 2 guard in the modern NBA, but he's got good length. He's got a great shot. He played great at St. John's last year. He's good at Iona before that. Detroit obviously has quite a few young guards on their roster, but they are a team in desperate need of talent wherever they can find it. They also need shooting. Jenkins wasn't a elite 3-point shooter in college, but he was quality. He was solid last year. He's looked good so far in Summer League. I'm curious your thoughts on him, because he could kind of fall into that category of, he's just a guy who's going to dominate at this level against this kind of competition. But, who knows what that looks like in the actual NBA. But I've been very impressed by what we've seen from him so far in Summer League.
Yeah, Jenkins is he's an interesting one because he's older and not particularly explosive.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't really think to yourself, well, that guy's going to dominate, but he's been really, really good. I haven't seen the last game where he scored as many, but I saw him in a game prior, and he just looked in control. And that's where the maturity comes in. So I don't know how confident I am in terms of the NBA prospects for him, but it's undeniable he's been good in the summer league. Like, I can't say anything other than that. And then one more guard that I think's thrived before we go on to some guys who are struggling, Trey Alexander.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason I want to say this is because Trey Alexander, to me, could have been a first-round pick the last 2 years. And he found himself the perfect landing spot in Denver. He gets to play basketball instead of carrying an unforgiving burden. Like, he was a point guard when he was playing a 2-guard. Nembhard was the point guard last year. And then he plays the point guard, and he still gets you 17, 5, and 5.
Yeah.
And he shoots the ball well. He's got a 6'10" wingspan. He's a plus-size guard. He's demonstrated he can play both positions. And you probably rather have him in 2-guard. But last year, when he was a 2-guard, his percentages were even better, and they were similar scoring outputs on an even better team, in my opinion. Even though it was a 6 seed Creighton that year and a 3 seed this past year, that team was better than this one. And I just don't understand how 60 players, I guess 58 players, go ahead of Trey Alexander. I would have taken him 40, like at the lowest. And so he's a guy that, unsurprisingly to me, has played very well in Summer League.
Wanted to mention a few guys. First of all, a few injuries. Unfortunately, the Deron Holmes news, very sad. He hurt himself in his first Summer League game with Oklahoma City, is out for the entire year with a torn Achilles. You just hate to see that. I thought Holmes was a guy who was going to have a nice role for that team, for Denver, not for Oklahoma City, for Denver. I thought he was going to have a really nice role for them, and I thought the opportunity was there for him to be kind of a backup center, smaller big for that team, for Jokic. So sad to see that for him. Hopefully he can come back and look great next season. Devin Carter is out right now. He's not going to be out for as long, but we haven't gotten a chance to see him. I'm curious the fit for him in Sacramento. We wouldn't have gotten a good chance to see that in Summer League anyway, because mostly I'm curious, how does he look alongside De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, and how that roster is going to shake out, and now DeMar DeRozan. So very curious with Carter. Hopefully we'll see him sooner than later. But of guys who are playing, who are struggling, we can close with Bronny. I think we have to talk about Bronny. As we spend a lot more, the entire nation spending a lot more time talking about a 55th overall pick than you'd expect them to, but we know why. But if there's anybody else before we talk about Bronny that maybe you want to mention of they're struggling, but you're not concerned, or they're struggling and you are concerned about some of these guys who are in this draft class.
Well, the answer would be Alex Sarr, but this is a college basketball show. So the one that would stand out to me would be Jacoby Walter. I'm not that worried about him, because I think, you took him at 19. I think that's a good spot to take him. Yeah. So he's going to be able to shoot it. Like, I know he struggled down the stretch at Baylor, but you can tell he can shoot the basketball. Yeah. Now the question is, how athletic is he? And that's where I lost my Jacoby Walter stock, is I don't think he has any wiggle with the basketball. So that puts him as a 3 and D. And then the question becomes, how good of a defender is he? And how elite of a shooter can he be? Because I think he's a good shooter. And even though the numbers at Baylor weren't amazing, I really do think he's a very good shooter at the college ranks. So how good of a shooter is he in the NBA ranks? How good of a defender is he? This isn't the setting to demonstrate those skill sets. They ask for more individual creation. And like I said, I don't think he has the wiggle. So I'm not that worried, but you have to point out struggles when you see them. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's like, you shouldn't take anybody doing great, super as well. And Walter's not shooting it super well right now. I think he has a role in the NBA, and I think he can easily kind of reach the, what you'd expect out of a 19th overall pick in this class. And I think he's going to get there. But he hadn't looked great up to this point. And I think that's a fair thing to acknowledge. You mentioned Alex Sarr. Again, we're not going to litigate him too much, but holy cow, he went 15 in the game, or 16 in the game. He's probably going to be fine, but yikes, that is definitely going to make some headlines. And similarly with Bronny James, he's going to make headlines regardless, because he's the son of LeBron James, because he was drafted in a spot where people didn't really think he deserved to be drafted because of his stats in college weren't great. It's not like he went 17th to the Lakers. He went 55th. I have a hard time being super mad about a player getting picked 55th. Like, it just doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but he hasn't helped the headlines because he has not played well so far in the Summer League. He's not making his 3-point shots. It's kind of similar to what we saw at USC, where you can tell the basketball IQ is there, and you'd expect it to be. The athleticism is there. He can be an impactful defender even at his size, because of his wingspan, because of his his jumping ability and just overall athleticism and intelligence. But the shot is just is not there. I mean, it just doesn't look like it's there at all. And unless he can dramatically improve in that area, it's really hard to see how this is going to work for him. Again, a lot of guys get picked in the 50s don't make it in the NBA at all. So he doesn't have a huge bar to clear to be somebody who overperforms that draft spot, but he doesn't even look like he's going to be able to do that at this point.
I feel like the pressure is getting to him in the sense of he's shooting more than you'd probably expect a player picked in that same spot, the player with his skill set to shoot. Like, it's not as if he was Trey Alexander, who scored 17 a game and was a junior in college and played with the ball in his hands.
Right.
Well, that's what you're kind of looking at. You're looking at, hey, I'm going to shoot 15 times. Like, I don't think he's meant to be a scorer at any level, and unless he were to play like 4 years in college and develop into that. But he's a supplementary piece on a basketball court as a defender, someone who can run, maybe hit an open shot, but they're asking for too much creation. And I think part of that's the pressure. I think part of it's the hype. I feel badly for him because, I mean, he's trying. There's no denying it. He's working hard, but it's just not. If another pick, if he were another person, 55th pick, I guarantee you he would shoot fewer shots.
Yeah. And
that's the sad part, because everyone bags on him for inefficiency, but the inefficiency wouldn't be that bad or as glaring if he weren't shooting as much as he is, because of, I think, the pressure of trying to prove people wrong, and or just the hype that factors in and they feed him the ball.
Well, Leaf, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you so much for coming on, for talking about some of these guys. We'll have more summer league coverage in the next couple of weeks as we get rounded out and kind of look at where some of these guys are going to end up, if some of these undrafted guys end up sticking or not. Of course, stick with us on Locked On College Basketball, as we're also going to keep you up to date on recruiting, final transfer portal stuff as that comes along, Olympic coverage, all sorts of fantastic stuff coming your way on Locked On College Basketball. Thanks again to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Isaac will be back with you all on Thursday. Then he and I will round out the show on Friday. Until then, as always, peace out.